Hello, fellow fight fans, and welcome to the Untitled Fightcast number 018. I'm your host, Zephyr Corvo, and we have more good news this week, not just in MMA, but in combat sports in general. So, getting right into it, wrap up, lock in, and let's get it started. So, before anything else, the first thing I want to do this week is fix a mistake from last week. I said that Cowboy had his last fight with Anthony Pettis stopped because he blew his nose, but that was actually me misremembering. That particular incident happened last year on June 9th when he was fighting Tony Ferguson. Cowboy's last fight with Pettis was actually all the way back in 2013, right at the beginning of the year, on January 26th, where he took a couple of punches to the face before being crippled by a handful of solid body kicks. It was a very quick fight, getting stopped at 2:35 of the very first round, but hey, eating a shin to the ribs will do that to you. With that out of the way, I want to talk about the next pay-per-view event, and that's UFC 250. Originally scheduled to be in Sao Paulo, Brazil on May 9th, it is now scheduled for June 6th, the location still to be announced. Only one fight has been officially announced for that card, and that is the title fight between Amanda Nunes and Felicia Spencer, which I'm very much looking forward to. Ariel Helwani, the well-known reporter for ESPN, said in his most recent article that the UFC is planning on using the Apex facility in Las Vegas, but it's still up in the air in terms of what the Nevada State Athletic Commission will do by then regarding putting on sporting events. So it may be at the Apex or it may not. We'll just have to wait and see. Now, UFC 251 was supposed to take place in Perth, Australia on June 7th, but that has been postponed due to the current restrictions still in place in Australia, banning gatherings of more than 10 people in one spot. So the card had to be moved. That's still 100% up in the air. Headlining that card was supposed to be Valentina Shevchenko versus JJ Calderwood, and since it was supposed to be on June 7th, maybe that fight will be on the June 6th card, possibly, hopefully, because it does line up with their fight camps, assuming that they were still training and didn't stop when 251 was postponed. That would mean 2 women's belts on the line, and that is always a treat. That being said, I'm very much aware that I'm being super hopeful, but for those of you that don't know, Valentina is my MMA bae, always rooting for her, always love to watch her fight, so yes please. Now, in terms of the safety precautions for UFC 249, the media has long since been asking Dana White about this very issue, and his response was repeatedly something to the effect of, "Don't worry about it. Everyone will be safer here than going to the grocery store." Well, we finally have some answers to this burning question, and I have to say, it makes me feel much better about the event. Starting with the changes in front of the camera, first is actually another correction to an assumption that I made last week. I said that each fighter would probably only get 1 corner person, but they will indeed be allowed to have 3. But on to the actual changes, and firstly, let's start with the broadcast team. In attendance will be John Anik doing play-by-play as always, and then Joe Rogan and Daniel Cormier doing color commentary. So that part actually isn't changed either. But the big change is that they actually won't be sitting anywhere close to one another. They will each have their own table. Now, as for how far away from each other, I'm not sure. Will they all be sitting on the same side? Will they be sitting kind of like the judges, where they're sitting on different sides of the cage to get their own different angles? I'm not sure. They will also be wearing masks, so that will be a look in terms of seeing them on camera wearing masks. My concern more so is for the audio, but in my experience talking to people in public, masks haven't necessarily obscured anyone's voices, and so I'm hoping that the audio will be mostly up to par. The ESPN article about this entire subject also said they would be wearing protective equipment along with the masks, but didn't necessarily specify anything else, so I'm going to go out on a limb and say they'll probably also be wearing gloves. As for the post-fight interviews, they will still happen, but they will be very different as well. Instead of taking place in the octagon as per usual, the winner will be escorted to an area somewhere inside the arena, but outside the cage and away from the broadcasters. There, they will be given a headset that will be sanitized after each use, and Joe will do an interview from his cage side position. The actual fights will be presented differently as well. We'll get more corner work audio, and to me is very interesting. I've been watching the Ultimate Fighter TV series, and it'll be very much like that, where there is a super small crowd in those fights, and it's really, really easy to hear the corners, and I always like hearing the advice they're giving, and then seeing whether or not the fighter actually follows that advice. There will also apparently be a focus on the actual sounds of the fight. Now, with no crowd in attendance, which, by the way, there's no crowd in attendance, the sounds of the fight are going to be more audible anyhow. But from the way it sounds in the actual ESPN article, the crew will actually be focusing on it. So who knows? Perhaps the audio engineers might possibly be mixing the audio live to bring even more attention to it. And speaking of the audio team, there's even more going on behind the scenes in terms of changes. The actual number of staff has decreased to 80 some odd people, down from the usual of around 130. I believe Dana White said that for their last card in Brazil, which was the last card they even put on as this pandemic was ramping up, that it was somewhere closer to 50. So I am a little curious as to why it wasn't brought down further, but the crew in the production truck will also be limited by the use of quote-unquote mobile units. I'm not actually sure what that means because there was no elaboration on the subject. Now, obviously, they won't be in the actual truck, but I'm not sure if that means maybe other trucks or like desks sitting outside. Like I said, I'm not sure. In terms of the few people still in the truck, though, the UFC has gone so far as to not only provide protective gear, but also separate the staff with plastic partitions. As for the cage itself, it'll be cleaned between every single fight. Now, in terms of everyone attending the event, whether it be fighter, staff, or media, they will all be isolated upon arrival, tested, and then practice social distancing as much as possible. There will also be medical tests every single day, so that's wonderful to know that they're not just going to get the initial test results and then just kind of let them go do their thing. Apparently, the UFC has enough test kits, not just for 249, but also for the May 13th and 16th events, since they know some people like the broadcast team will be there all week. According to an email sent to athletes by the UFC, they and their teams will all get their very own hotel rooms to work out in, with mats and sanitizer for those mats, as well as their own personal saunas for that last bit of cutting weight. I mean, this might be the most VIP-like treatment that these, or really any fighters, have ever got. And this is just what the ESPN article that came out this morning covered. The full plan that was sent to the Athletic Commission was apparently 25 pages. So I think it's safe to say that so long as all the rules and procedures are actually followed by everyone involved, they will be super safe. Can something still happen? Well, sure, but I'd actually agree with Dana that people are safer there than going to the grocery store. However, on June 6th, there's another, possibly even more interesting event going on. It's being hosted by Cardin Combat Sports, and it will be taking place at Forbes Field in Topeka, Kansas. And this isn't just an MMA event. Oh no, there will be a plethora of sports taking place all under one card. There will be boxing, there will be kickboxing, MMA, and of all things, bare knuckle boxing. Now, I talked about BK boxing in a video a few weeks ago, but as far as I'm aware, this will be the first BK boxing event sanctioned outside of the BKFC, that being the Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship. So that alone is very interesting to me. From what I have read, there will be both a boxing ring and a cage set up side by side. Now, I'm not sure how this is going to work for viewing purposes, as either or could obscure the view of the other possibly, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. That, or my only other thought on that matter would be that instead of having everyone seated 360 degrees around the ring and the cage like they normally do, perhaps it'll be sort of like an auditorium setup where instead of a stage at the front, the cage and the ring will be set up at the front, and then everyone will all be sat to one side. But again, this is totally speculation. I'm also not sure as to what the actual reasoning behind this hybrid card is. However, I will be reaching out to someone at Card and Combat Sports for more on that event, so hopefully I'll actually be able to do a full video on that event a week or two prior to when it goes on. If it does, when I get more information, I will get back to y'all, and I'm excited. So, good news coming out of the world of combat sports, and I'm very much looking forward to the future with some hope in my heart. Fingers crossed that those hopes don't get let down. With all of the other sports in the world doing nothing as of right now, combat sports continues to provide for the fans and hopefully the masses, and maybe this will be a great time for people that aren't fans of combat sports to get into it. Thank you as always so much, the most ever of all time, for tuning in and supporting the program. Ring that bell down below if you want to stay updated on this or any of the content I post on this channel. This has been Zephyr Corvo for the Untitled Fightcast, and I will talk to y'all in next week's episode.